welcome to the latest webinar where today Donna and I will be discussing impermanence and the ecology of death and how we can deal with these changing times. And so I'd like to introduce my co-host, Donna Mariella, who is an embodiment coach and so used to helping people with their relationship issues, whether it's to other people or to things or situations, so a relationship to life in general. Hi, Donna.
Hello. I just want to check on that you're recording.
I am recording. Thank you for checking.
Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be with you and really quite exciting actually to be talking on this topic. And I say that with a lot of humility that this is quite a deep topic and that ultimately all we're going to be able to do today is just like skim it a little bit. But I'm quite excited that we're even having this conversation and even to see actually so many people interested in it because it's so important, I feel, for what we're going through for ourselves as humans. And so thank you. Thank you for being here and being interested in this.
Yeah, and I think you wanted to just say a few words about it being a sensitive subject that we're going to be dealing with today.
Yeah, and so we're going to be touching on death, impermanence. We'll potentially be touching on grief, depending on where everything takes us. And so what I would really like to present is that if you are moving through a period of your life where things are really intense, there's really intense transitions, maybe there's a lot of grief, a lot of change, a lot of endings, to just take care of yourself. And what I mean by that is to allow the words to come in as long as they feel good, but to take care of yourself. If you need to step outside of the call, there may be certain things that we touch on today that we are able to touch on because we're coming from a regulated space. But if you are in deep transition, if you're in deep grief, if you're really confronting any big transitions, please have compassion for yourself that these words might not land. It might not be the time to receive some of our words. So really just listen to whatever's true to you and listen to whatever's going to be best for you ultimately.
Thank you. And we'll also be taking some questions at the end of the hour. So we're going to be kind of exploring this concept of impermanence because we really live in changing times. These are really transformational times. And things seem to be changing and transforming at a really rapid rate. We're dealing with death on a daily basis, and that can be death of loved ones. There seems to be a lot of death of people at the moment. I know a lot of my family and my clients dealing with that, but also death of situations, death of relationships, death of the old way of being, death of just the moving out of how life used to be and just being forced actually to accept change. And so even though we're in this kind of consciousness expansion, that's been talked about for millennia by Indigenous people, for decades here in the West, and we're experiencing it, but with change comes the acceptance of leaving things behind, moving on, old chapters coming to an end, doors closing, new ones opening. And so we have to honor that process within ourselves. We can't just move from one thing to the other. There's an emotional response, there's a spiritual response. And so this age that we're living in, some people call it we're moving into the age of Aquarius. There's these big kind of timelines coming to an end. And this transition out of the Kali Yuga, even in Hinduism. But and even though the age of Aquarius is a little bit new agey for me, there is actually an astrological event that accompanies this, and Pluto is going to fully move into Aquarius for 20 years in November. It's been kind of retrograding backwards and forwards from Capricorn, touching into Aquarius and back again. But it comes into Aquarius for good in November. And so some people are saying that because Pluto is this great heralder of change and kind of brings the kind of the societal change in life, that we are moving into this age of Aquarius, and so ruled by Uranus, which is the bringer of quick change. How do you feel that this kind of like change in kind of this the age is kind of resonating for you?
Yeah, I really actually love to consider this much more from the archetypical, like the archetype of Aquarius and Uranus and the 11th house in astrology, which is everyone's talking about, okay, we're bringing in this Aquarian energy. But then the question to me is, well, what does that actually mean? Because when we look at it astrologically, Aquarius comes after Capricorn, it comes after structure, it comes after known, and it holds in its archetype this rejection and ending of that which we know. It's the complete innovation. It's stepping into this state of we are going into complete creativity of something completely new that we can't touch on, which so many people I think are very excited about. And we want all of these new things and we want new ways of living, and we're calling in this innovation. And true innovation is completely unknown. And it really does require this rebellious, this courageous act of letting go of that which no longer serves and actually stepping into a space that we don't know what it will become, of calling in true innovation, calling in the new, with the risk that we could make mistakes, with the risk that we could get it wrong, with the risk that it could be chaotic, that there might be periods of time of not knowing. And so as we look at this, even the fact that it's so much in our language of we're calling the new times in, we're wanting change, to me, as with what I do in my job, is okay, so how can we handle true change? Not just speak about it, but how can we actually embody it, survive it, and thrive it, both honoring that which we need to let go of, both grieving when we need to grieve, and also being able to take that risk of like, oh, but we don't know. And it's also very interesting because Aquarius is connected to the 11th house, which is community. And actually, in times of death, in times of change, when we're going through really big transitions in our life, we are not supposed to be stable and rational and make sense and be able to live our life and everything be tidy. We want to be able to completely destabilize, to lean on our community, for our community to stabilize us so that we can go through the true revolution of transformation, which to me is what that archetype holds.
Yeah, beautifully put. So, how we help ourselves stepping into the unknown, because doing that, can bring up all kinds of issues for us, control patterns, particularly, because we want to know, that's why we all read tarot cards and go to seers, because we want to know what's going to happen, and so, but really letting go of that and just going into a place of trust can be quite difficult. And so one of the kind of teachings that has been really helpful for me, so I've meditated on death, etc., a lot in my Buddhist training, but actually, I still feel quite young, so I don't really contemplate it that often until something happens, like a family member dies, or a loved one, or or a big transition in my life, and so I don't feel like, death is close for me, and so I don't think about it, but we really should, because it's coming to us all, and so there are lots of practices within Buddhism that I learned, which, we meditated on death a lot, but the core kind of teaching is impermanence, recognize. So in Buddhism, their understanding of life is like a series of consciousnesses. So you're just transitioning from one state of consciousness to another. Whether it's your birth consciousness, you're going to have one state of consciousness, then moving into different stages of your life, moving through different sleep consciousnesses. Lucid dreaming, for example, prepares us for death, and then moving into death consciousness. And so we're constantly, life is a series of moments that are constantly evolving, and so nothing is ever the same. that old analogy of the river, isn't it? Of constantly running, constantly moving, constantly flowing. That's life. It never stays the same. So if we just let go of the banks and stop trying to hold on tight and just go with the river, does make life a lot easier. And so with this understanding of impermanence and that there's changes happening all the time, those changes in Buddhism, it's called, it brings to mind dependent origination, it's called, where everything is dependent on everything else. And so these changes, these momentary changes that are happening to us as we go through life, they're actually created and caused by a series or a number of things. And so everything that's manifest is dependent on everything else. And so nothing ever dies per se. The Tibetans don't really think, and the Buddhists don't think of like a true death. It's just a transitional stage. It's just transition. It's a pretty big one, but it's a transitional stage. And so, yeah, this kind of concept of impermanence, that's really kind of comforting for me when I'm kind of moving through. It just helps me to kind of surrender.
Yeah, I really love you bringing impermanence in, and it's really interesting to me because I often consider that our relationship to impermanence directly shows us our relationship to life. And I say that because even when you say impermanence, I notice in myself, like immediately what comes up to me is the endings, but actually the birth that comes from impermanence, the fact that a little seedling is not going to grow into a plant unless there's impermanence. The fact that a baby will not grow into a toddler, grow into a child unless there's impermanence, because there needs to be the death of that which was for the birth of that which is. And so as we hear impermanence, and I know for a long time, for me, there was this sense of like, oh, I'm always losing grasp with something. I can't quite catch up because it's slipping through my hands. But on the other side of that is every moment something ends, something else comes in, because ultimately we are in a cyclical world. We see this in the seasons, we see this in the cycles of the moon. When we get to winter, when we go into that death and we keep moving through it, we find spring, we find rebirth. And so yes, impermanence, I liked how you said it's quite comforting to me as well, because actually when I realized that every single thing, every single moment is never going to be again, it's never going to be the exact thing again, and I can actually open to that loss, and I can actually open my heart and be present and be like, wow, this exact moment is completely unique. And I can also receive the gifts of impermanence. I can also receive the beauty of it. And so to me, the more comfortable we are with the loss, with the transitional nature of it, with this is going, this is changing, the more we can receive the beauty of what already is, at least for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you said, just opening to that present moment. I think we have to understand what it is when we're talking about heart consciousness and opening our hearts, because I hear it a lot, but actually, what is it to truly open our hearts? And I think we have to have in order to do that truly, we have to have quite a strong connection to our our higher self or the divine, however you want to phrase it, or whatever terminology you want to use, but just to a higher aspect of ourselves. We need to have confidence in that, because that works through the heart space, through the heart chakra. It's the seat of our, it's a brain, it's a kind of like our true perception is through the heart. And so to open that after all of the kind of, being in the heart, but actually I sometimes feel like I'm in my heart, but actually I'm closed because of the situation that I'm in. And so can you just talk a little bit more to that? Like, how do we actually open our hearts into and surrender into these moments of change that can be quite scary?
Yeah, this is quite a big one. I would say slowly and with compassion. Because same as you, so many people talk about opening the heart, and actually to truly be in this world of duality, of suffering, of pain, of death, of endings, with a truly open heart, a heart that's expansive enough to hold all of it, not conditionally, not my heart is open to this, but not to that. And this doesn't mean, just on a separate note, that we can't have boundaries. We can have boundaries with an open heart. That's separate things. But to actually be able to open our heart to reality, to life, to the truth of humanity and the world we live in and the duality that we live in, to fully open to that takes a lot of courage. And in my experience, we do it slowly. In my experience, we go slow. And then when we need to shut down, we have compassion for ourselves. And then we try to open again. And I actually think in times of really big transition, so times of a lot of grief, maybe through a death, you'll really feel this as you move through the grief process. There's often initially a complete shutting down for some people, where there is a, can I hold this much aliveness, actually? Because yes, it's suffering and it's pain, but it's also being human. It's also living in a human body, living in a human life. And so when you're going through a lot of grief and a really deep process, it takes time, it takes patience, and you just open a little bit. And then when you reach capacity, you come back and you have compassion, and then you open a little bit more. But the question that I would often ask with it is, am I being conditional? Like, can I actually soften into whatever's in front of me and find the expansiveness? Because the heart can hold anything. Like, the heart is so expansive, and you hear that in all spiritual traditions, the expansiveness of the heart. And we haven't been taught to do that. And so my invitation is just for people to be slow with it. We don't need to break our hearts open or to override boundaries or to hurt ourselves in doing it, but to actually just explore, can I open to this person that's in front of me, and I'm having a conversation, and even having the contemplation, I may never see this person again. I may never speak to this person again, because at any point, anything can change. Can you hold that awareness when you're interacting with a person, or you're interacting with a plant or with a flower or whatever you're interacting with? This moment, I may never get to do this again. And can you open your heart both to the pain of that, of like, oh, but I love this thing, I don't want to lose it. And can you also open your heart to the beauty of like, but right now I get to do this. I get to be in this relationship, in this communication, in this moment. And so to me, it's just building capacity, being very slow, being very compassionate with ourselves.
Yeah, and as you were speaking there, it just kind of made me think about how difficult that is actually, because we're all dealing with broken hearts, whether it's through the death of loved ones, or things that have happened to us in the past that have been really traumatic, people that have broken our hearts in the past. And so we're dealing with, with broken hearts. And so it really takes a long time to recover. But there is, I love that idea of just opening slowly, just having a look. Okay, but what does that actually, when you say open, what does that actually mean? And so for me, how I interpret that, sorry, I'm trying to get down to the essence of this, but how I interpret that is that, when I'm being really truly open, I'm centered in my heart, but I'm also just aware, have open awareness and open consciousness with no judgment, with no attachment to anything. It's just this open awareness. And for me, that's how I interpret it. Is that what you were saying?
I mean, that sounds pretty accurate. And I imagine it will be different for everyone at different points. And a way that I recognize when I'm in that state is because I feel like I can see what's in front of me versus that I'm projecting onto what's in front of me. And so there's this like slight difference, which is I can actually receive the moment. I can actually soften into the moment, surrender into the moment, receive the moment, whatever it is. I mean, I could be literally at checkout till in a supermarket. It doesn't have to be anything mystical or magical, but I can actually soften into the awe and the beauty of that unique moment of there's a human here who is spending her time checking out a till, like that humanity. And so to me, it also connects me to our humanity, to the all. And I'm really happy that you actually touched on the broken heart piece, because we have been brought up, most of us, and I'm sure there's some people who haven't, but most of us have actually been brought up in a culture where, one, we are taught that grief is a bad thing, that fear is a bad thing, grief is a bad thing. And so when we first had these heartbreak, our reality shattering breaks, where something that we believed was stable, shattered. And so our whole understanding of the stability of life shattered. We don't have support, and often it's seen as a failure. And actually, death and transition is often seen as a failure. Like, we may decide to separate from a partner, or we may decide to leave a job, and we can consciously choose that. And yet we will often get reflected as like, oh, it didn't work, it failed. Whereas actually there's almost this sense of like we've lost the idea that no, endings are natural, and endings are a natural part of human life. It's not us failing, it's not us doing something wrong. We're not supposed to be put together and perfect and like walking through life. Actually, going through moments of grief, going through moments of transition, of death, to me actually are the great awakeners. They're the points in our life that awaken us and transform us. So they're pivotal times in our life. They're not failures. And so, yeah, we have a lot of heartbreak trauma because nobody taught us. And also we live in a world where often when we're in grief, we're actually in isolation. Whereas I don't believe that that's the way it's supposed to be. I believe when we're in grief, we should be able to shatter into the arms of our community. Whereas right now we often have to do it by ourselves. And so we're having to still go to work and keep our lives together while every part of us is shattering and rebuilding of like, what's my new view of life?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you said that actually, because we are so disconnected, especially in the West, from, our families live in different countries, our friends live all over the country and in different countries, and so we are more isolated. But I did a grief ritual a few years ago, a West African grief ritual that was 3 days long. And there was 40 of us, because there needed to be, in their terminology, it takes a village to grieve. And so we held each other for 3 days while we went through various processes, but of releasing grief, because it gets buried really deeply. We don't know how to process it, actually. And so it can cause lots of problems in the body, and an animal will just naturally kind of shake when it's been through something traumatic or shocking, to get it out of its cells. So it shakes until it's released from the cells. And so there needs to be this kind of like release from the body of the grief, and quite often it's kind of held in the chest area, isn't it? The lungs in Chinese medicine are renowned for holding the grief, so people can get respiratory problems, etc., if they don't process their grief. And actually we can soak up grief from other people, from children particularly soak up grief from their parents, and so that can cause respiratory issues. So yeah, that's a big subject, grief, but back to death. So what you were also kind of saying as well, just kind of like really kind of reminded me of the shamanic process of death and rebirth. We're going through this death and rebirth process, which is quite a shamanic process, whether we like it or not, through our life. But actually, some of us step into that process in a deeper way, in a more conscious way, particularly when we work with plants. You and I hold plant initiations, and I've been holding them for many years. Learned from the wonderful Pam and Montgomery and Carol Guyot, and these are initiatory processes where you spend a period of time with a plant, and you only consume that plant, or you consume it every day, and if it's a longer period of time, and you spend time getting to know the plant, merging with the plant. And what happens is the plant initiates you into its world, into a new way of being. And so within that, a part of you has to die, because a part of you gets revealed to be false, or gets revealed to be just mistaken, or just kind of like conditioned, or some part of you needs healing. And so that part, that wounded part of you can be let go of or integrated. And so these kind of initiations have been, they've been kind of taught for millennia. Even I've been reading a book by Jeremy Nagler, actually, about the shamanic interpretation of the pyramid texts, and where they've recognized that what was thought to be funerary texts and funerary instructions on the kind of like the tombs of temples and pyramids are actually, they can be interpreted in other ways. They can be interpreted as initiatory, because what a lot of these ancient traditions and wisdom traditions did is they took people through initiations to release these kind of human conditioned ways of thinking and human patterns of the mind, fears basically, so that when we die, we're ready to die, and we don't have these kind of conditions that are going to prevent us from moving through the abyss, or moving through the lower astral, or the eighth sphere. There's lots of different names for it. Crossing the river Styx, they call it in Celtic shamanism, which I like. And so moving through this part of this intermediary state between when we're fully kind of crossed over, and from between life and fully crossed over, there's this bardo or intermediary state. And so that can be really challenging, apparently, because we're confronted with all of the stuff we've not dealt with in this life. And so all of these mystery traditions and ancient religions, they all knew that we needed to prepare in order to get across that bardo, that intermediary state. We need to deal with our stuff in this life. And so, this kind of death and rebirth process has, our ancestors have been doing it for millennia, so that we can die before we've properly died. And even in Buddhism, lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming is, in Buddhism, it's dream yoga. It's one of the highest yoga tantras. And what this does is it allows you to become conscious. It teaches you to become conscious in your dreams. So, because it's the closest thing that we've got to death. Going to sleep is the closest thing we've got to death. It's like a little death every night. So we can train for our death, so that we can take on board and approach in a very conscious way this the biggest initiation of our life, because our death consciousness, the state of mind that we're in when we die at the point of death, that propels us into the next consciousness state. And so we need to make sure that we're kind of like addressing our states of consciousness, and that's what we're talking about with all of this, isn't it? It's like, what state of mind are we in, or state of body in your case?
Yeah, and I love that you actually came from the plants into the idea of initiation, because I think it's very common for us to be like, okay, well, how do we prepare for death? How do we initiate into death, especially when we don't have traditions, when we don't have support? And I would love to offer that every single moment of every day we get to prepare. We get to actually do this preparatory work. Yes, in ancient times, we would have had all of that support, and maybe in the future we will have again. But right now, we get to actually put that into practice ourselves. We get to say, how do I react to any transition in my life? How do I react when I thought something was going to be one thing and suddenly it changes? Well, how do I react when there is a change, there's a transition, or there's an ending? Maybe a friend is going to move countries. How do you react to the ending or the transformation of that relationship, or an ending of a relationship? And so we were actually given, and at nighttime in dream, we're given these constant points to see what comes up, what are my patterns in the face of death, and I would like to say the unknown, because to me death is really synonymous with the unknown, the great mystery. We actually just don't know. It's that surrender, that lack of control, the wow, will we survive this? What will be? And the plants, to me, are great initiators into this, because they are not separate from the cycle of death and rebirth. A plant doesn't hold on to its flowers after it's bloomed. It just lets them go. It lets them fall. The trees let their leaves fall. Every cycle, they have this natural cycle. And so when you actually work with the plants and you ask for them to help you with transitions, with this cyclical manner, they can initiate you. Like, this wisdom isn't hidden wisdom. It's in our bodies. We are part of nature. We already know how to die. We already know how to be reborn, because it's what we do. It's not separate from us. And I say that just for us to remember, and it's just, of course, an opinion, but just for us to remember that we don't need something huge. We don't need a big teacher or a big mystery school to remember that. We just need to remember that we already know how to be in nature. We already know how to transform. We know how to die. And every single day we get the opportunity to see, okay, what are the things that stop me? Does the fear arise? Does the aversion? Does the attachment? Like, what comes up? And we get to play with that.
Yeah, and there are plants that are associated with every different aspect of death. And whether it's plants, spirits that are psychopomps, I work with the rose, and so rose spirit is a beautiful, and there are many plant spirits that do this, but rose is a beautiful plant spirit that helps earthbound spirits, or the souls of the deceased, to move through the veil. And there are many different aspects of death that the plants support us with. And you and I met in the jungle, didn't we? And we were working with ayahuasca in the Amazon, and wow, how much of us died during that time there. I think we'd certainly emerged very different people, or the start of an emerging process, absolutely. But those teacher plants, those kind of psychoactive plants, what they do is they show us, don't they, the relationship that we have to life, how we understand life, but also how our relationship to spirit, and therefore they can show us what we need to work with and work on within ourselves before we die. Otherwise we're taking it with us, and we'll just have to go back round the wheel and come back round and have to deal with it next time. So these beautiful teacher plants help us do that. But what I realized after blasting my mind open and my psychic channels with ayahuasca in the jungle is that actually we have beautiful common native plants that do very similar, but maybe not in such a brutal way. We've got our own psychoactive plants. We've got the beautiful mushrooms of our lands that really help us to be human and recognize what it is to live in our hearts and embrace that death process. They like gateway plants. They help to move us through and connect to other plant spirits. And actually, in our land, the elder tree is our ayahuasca. It's such a powerful plant spirit that can take you to the point of death, to show you what you are still carrying, what you need to deal with in order to have a good transition at the end of your life. And so Elder will bring the darkest stuff up for you so you can have a look at it, and so, of course, when I'm talking about plants, I'm talking about them, working with them in a shamanic sense. You know, take I don't take plants to get rid of stuff, you know, to just cancel out the stress or cancel out the anger or whatever it is. I work with plants to bring them up so I can have a good look at it and see, and you know, and get down to the root cause of what it is. Although I did realize actually, as I was meditating earlier today, that if I believe that everything is impermanent and dependently originating upon everything else, and causes and conditions, there can't be a root cause because there's so many causes and conditions into what, you know, we're complex beings. And so there's not a root cause to our kind of like illusions or our kind of behavioral patterns, etc. They're probably a main one though. But you know, there's lots of them, lots of kind of like conditions that go into the way we are and our kind of obscurations, as they say in Buddhism. But yeah, back to the plants. So elder really is an amazing plant to help us deal with death. And then you and I have just started working with the beautiful belladonna, although I know it's only just a recent addition to your apothecary, but belladonna is an amazing plant spirit who has come into my life this year and is already showing me how to release kind of like binds and ties to old patterns, old karmas, old toxic people in our life or situations in our life. And I realized that the Latin name of belladonna is Atropa belladonna. And so Atropa comes from the Greek goddess Atropos. So Atropos was one of the three fates, or one of the three Norns in Norse, or the weavers of the web. And what she did is she cuts the cord at the end of life. And she also deals with any debts that need to still be paid, any energetic or outstanding debts, not necessarily monetary, you know, it's about energy and promises, etc. And so Atropos cuts that cord and so allows the energy bodies to leave the physical body. So yeah, what a powerful plant spirit. So belladonna, which is poisonous, you know, is a poisonous plant. And so these poisonous plants are really close to the land of the dead anyway. And so, yeah, Atropa belladonna we work with as an essence. We don't actually take the poisonous plant, you know. An essence is the bioresonance of the plant imprinted into water. And so you can work with, as consciousness is frequency, you can connect to the consciousness of any plant through just the essence, the bioresonance of it. They're just amazing. And so what I found as well, I don't know what you find, is that a lot of these really transformational plants, they're really protective as well, because when we're going through these, I mean, belladonna is just one of the most protective plant spirits there is. You know, she's up there with the big guns. And so as we go through these transitional times, as we're dealing with death, you know, we're energetically vulnerable actually, because we're more connected, more open to the astral spaces, the emotional realm, and particularly the lower astral, you know, where there are lots of kind of parasitic entities ready to kind of jump in, that this is where the plants can really step into their own as well and be that protective space around us as we're going through these times, because we're energetically vulnerable. What do you think?
Yeah. I'm loving bringing in belladonna. It's very new for me, so I'm getting very excited to go deeper. And I definitely feel that. And I feel like this is where, for those of us who might be isolated, for those of us who don't necessarily have trusted people that we can lean on, this is where the plants come in, because they can hold us, they can stabilize us. And the truth is when we are going through death, transition, change, endings, within that, there is a death of ego, there is a death of self, there is a destabilization period. And that is not a negative. And I really want to say that because I often encounter people who are trying to control their grief. They're trying to control the chaos of their transformation and trying to get to the other side as quickly as possible. But that stage where we are a little bit discombobulated, where our energy is a bit all over the place, that is where that's the space of creativity. That's that womb space. It's the space of nothing and everything all at once. And so being able to stay safe in those places, to have stability, to have anchors, so that we don't almost suffocate the process, but we actually allow the full death to happen, the transition to happen and stabilize. The plants get to do this. And also we get to remove this idea of perfection. I feel like we've like medicalized everything so well. You know, death is supposed to look tidy and clean. And when you go through a breakup, you're supposed to go to therapy and do this. And it's, you know, you have this many steps of grief. And once you get through all the steps of grief, everything you've got through the process. In my experience with working with people, it's not that simple. And we can use maps as stabilizers. We can use maps as anchors. But the magic of transition is the surrender into the transition. Is I often like to actually think of it as like a trapeze artist who's going and flying, and at some point that trapeze artist has to just let go, and they don't know if they'll make it to the other side. They don't know if they'll drop to their death. They don't know if they will survive, but they let go anyway. And so the plants, and especially because they are so protective, those plants that help us to navigate the deepest, most, for me, they're awakening. They really are like those deepest dark nights of the soul. They awaken us to what's important. They awaken us to our true essence. They literally will shift reality. They will shift us. And the plants know that. The plants that can most hold us through those stages, they have a stability that you can anchor into. They will hold you. They have got you. And so you get to really lean on them. And I love that. I actually feel like they're coming back more in the world because we don't all have community. We don't all have people to hold us and to recognize, oh, my plant can hold me. My cat can hold me. I can actually create anchors. I can actually create, and if you're working with energy, you're able to create safety so that you can transform and go through that fire of, yeah, unknown.
Yeah, beautiful. And the more we do this, the more we're preparing for, our own death. We can objectively understand death and we can study all the different processes of what we think happens, but actually when it comes to subjectively experiencing that, then, I personally really want to be ready for that. And so, the plants have just been showing me all these different aspects of myself, but actually one that needs dealing with, but actually one of the things is control patterns that, are we as a spiritual person, one thing that comes up for me is that, I'm gonna have to deal with death within the normal worldly system as a spiritual person who understands it in a very different way. And so I'm going to have to surrender to that at some point. I can't be trying to control, are we prepared to die in a hospital surrounded by people who want to pump us with drugs to die? That's quite a challenging thought, actually, for somebody who's kind of meditated on my own death and would like a really beautiful death with all my loved ones around me in the forest, and the elves come and take me home. It's like that's. But it might not be like that. So there's a deep surrendering to all, letting go. And again, brings us back to these practices that of non-attachment. What are we actually attached to? How deep do our attachments go? And how can we kind of address them within ourselves? Do you think that's something we need to work on, letting go to that extent?
I think recognizing that recognizing where we're conditional in our open-heartedness, in our sense of safety, in our sense of preparedness, I think is a necessary part. But I actually feel like that on a global scale, because if we only feel safe to move forward if life meets these conditions, or I'm only going to be able to die how I would like to die, meeting these conditions, the truth is we don't know. The truth is I think I don't know if you can be ready for death. I don't know if anyone truly can be ready for that transition. But what I do believe is that we can be ready to not know. We can be ready to be with the unexpected. And so even if we talk about fear, you know, people, I hear a lot of like, oh, I'm not afraid of death, or this fearlessness. And to me, fear of death is very natural, actually. And also, I sometimes wonder, because some people who aren't afraid of death, are you afraid of life? Because some people, if you're afraid of life, you're also afraid of death. These are just two sides of the same coin. Some people are attracted to the release of the ending, but then are you sinking into and dying into life, which is right now, or are you focused on that? And so to me, either of those would be fear. But the question is, if you are dying and you're surrounded by strangers, what if you're surrounded by the person you hate the most in the world? What if that's the person that's there with you and holding your hand? What if you are in complete fear? Can we find the peace and the stillness in that, versus, oh, things need to be conditionally how I want them to be so that I can show up how I wish to be? And I feel like it takes me back to, we were talking about the open-heartedness. Am I open-hearted only if somebody who has similar beliefs to me is in front of me? And that, again, doesn't mean I have to say yes to anything. I can have complete boundaries. I can say no. I can lovingly say no to anything in my space. But do I close my heart to it? Or can my heart remain open unconditionally to the suffering, to the pain, to things that trigger me, to things that piss me off, to things that, like, can my heart hold it? Can I hold fear if it arises? Can I hold, and so that to me is the preparation for death. Isn't, oh, will I actually be ready to die? Is, am I ready to be in any situation and to remember what's important, to come back to presence, to keep breathing through it, to be able to hold it, to be able to move through that portal, which none of us can truly know unless you've had a near-death experience. And we get glimpses with lucid dreaming, we get glimpses with psychoactive plants, but we don't know. We don't truly know.
Yeah, and we've got, the plants, coming back to the plants again. But, they help us with all of these aspects, because what, with plant spirit healing, what we're doing is we're working with the plants to heal our astral body, which is part, the astral body will kind of, part of it will shatter at death, part of it will kind of move on with the finer mental body. And then kind of dissolve later on, because it's made up of our kind of our karmic stuff, our soul forces that we're here to heal. And so when I'm doing clearings on my clients, I'm healing their astral body, I'm clearing their astral body. And so that astral body is the emotional body. And so because all illness has an underlying emotional drive. All of our traumas have deeply embedded emotions attached to them. And so what the plants do is they're helping us to balance and bring balance to our emotions, so that rather than, like you were just saying, rather than just being completely overwhelmed by our emotions and ruled by them, we can still experience them because we want to. Like, I certainly want to be able to still experience the deep depths of joy and the deep depths of grief, because that makes me feel alive, and that it's deep experiences of life. But I don't want to be ruled by them and taken on this kind of crazy roller coaster of a ride by things that just knock me off center. and just so that I can just remain centered and be present within all of that experience. And so the plants really help us with that. There is literally a plant for everything. There's a plant to help us move through all these different issues and help us to bring balance that we've got. I mean, you can work with them elementally. If you're feeling that you've got a kind of a fire issue, you're too fiery, then you can work with a fire plant to bring balance to that. And so, or you could just work with water plants. A lot of the Venusian plants that we work with, they really help to kind of work on that level. And so the plants themselves, whether it's a conscious thing for you or not, the plants are helping us in this rebalancing of our emotions, helping us in our working towards being prepared for death anyway. So there's this beautiful dance, isn't there, between learning to live is actually learning to die. And then learning to die is learning to live. And so there's this beautiful duality of experience, which I just love. And I love the fact that when we're working with the plant spirits, they're not just working internally on that emotional level. They're working externally to us as well. They don't just work internally. You see them operating on the external world, and one of the plants that showed this to us was the dulse, wasn't it? The dulse seaweed initiation that we ran recently, a few months ago, where the dulse would bring up a situation in your life where you self-abandon, where you abandon your sense of self, whether it's a situation of conflict or all kinds of different situations it can be for people. But that situation that occurs where your mind goes blank, or you literally go into trauma response, and so you can't think properly, and so you've abandoned your center of self. But what the dulse would then do is bring up and orchestrate a situation in your life for you to see, once you've seen your pattern, to then heal it. And it was like, wow, it was just so kind of in your face. It was a really kind of masculine way of dealing with things, which I loved. Let's just deal with it and tackle it straight away. And so, yeah, these are just examples of the beautiful way that these plant spirits can help support us. And of course, they can also, there are plant spirits that help just protect your heart if you are really suffering from a broken heart. There are plant spirits that work to just protect your heart. The hawthorn, the beautiful hawthorn, roseberry willow herb, rose. These are warriors of the heart. And yeah, how have you experienced, because you've worked a lot with the Venusian plants as well. And so, yeah, how do you experience rose, for example?
Rose experience very differently depending on what I need, which is actually why I feel like rose is such a powerful plant, because she holds all of the colors of the rainbow. Like, there's so many different colors of rose, and she holds that. You can have like the pink, she can hold the compassion, the self-love. So when everything is overwhelming, if you're in a deep, dark place and actually what you just need is softness and to be held, she can hold you. But then she also has these deep hues, sometimes when the soil makes the petals almost black, and she'll help you go into the shadows and the grief and the deep, intense emotions. And then she also has the yellow, where she connects you to the joy of life and to the awe, which again is connected to the grief. It's like the rose to me supports us in what we were talking about, in that process of opening our heart and recognizing that the way that we open our heart needs different things. It isn't just a one way. Sometimes it's the passionate love, sometimes it's the joyful awe, sometimes it's the grief and the feeling, the aliveness, sometimes it's the self-love and the holding, the compassion. And so rose to me is just, it's just so magic in how she can hold you in all of it. Like, if there is one plant that can help you to be with the suffering of the world, like if you ever feel overwhelmed by the suffering of the world and your heart bleeds, you feel that heart pain, Rose is such a beautiful ally for this, because she can hold you in whatever state you are in. And she doesn't need you to be different, but there is always an invitation to move through into the next one. And so there's an invitation to move into the self-love if you need to be in the self-love, an invitation to grieve if you need to grieve, an invitation to passionately love. That red rose is always how I think, like the passion, and sometimes even the anger within that passion, the fire, and the yellow, the awe, the opening ourselves to the beauty. Like, she can hold you through it all. And so if there is one plant to help support you in through heartbreak, through heart opening, then to me that's rose, without a doubt.
And incidentally, Donna and I are hosting and facilitating a plant diet, an online plant diet in September with the beautiful Rose, and where we're going to be exploring the dynamic relationship between love and grief, and really diving into some embodiment processes and into the plant's rose spirit realm. And we're almost full, actually. We've only got 2 places left, so if anybody would like to join us.
I would love to just invite people into a contemplation if they did want to take it deeper, which is to just, as you move through the rest of your week, to recognize, one, are there any areas where you aren't stepping into something that you know to be true because you're afraid of change or transitions or endings? And also to just have that mantra in the back of your head of, we're all going to die and we don't know when. And just see, how does that change your interactions? And a beautiful journal practice, actually, if people want to do, is to consider, if I found out that I had 10 days to live, what would I do? And to really just begin to tune into what's important. And yeah, just that invitation to contemplate that, and just to see how it actually changes your experience of life, your experience of people.